Hey everyone, it's Lance from Christianity Minute. The last two episodes, we saw incredible power from Jesus. First, the calming of the sea, demonstrating his authority over the elements of nature. Last time, we saw his authority over the supernatural forces, commanding an incredible army of demons as Jesus drives them out of the demoniac. Today, we'll see his power to heal, but we'll also see his most incredible power as he brings back to life a 12-year-old girl. All right, so come along. Let's study together. We'll use the Bible as a tool to help us understand him and his word better. We should never be afraid to use a tool to its full ability. So let's not be afraid to mark our text as we explore to help in our understanding. Since this is a new section, I'm going to go ahead and mark it here. All right. Now, to start, as we always do, let's just do a cold read of today's text in Luke chapter 8, verses 40 through 56. Now, when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, who was ruler of the synagogue, and falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. As Jesus went, the people pressed around him, and there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for about 12 years. And though she had spent all of her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling, and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him, and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." While he was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." But Jesus, on hearing this, answered him, "Do not fear, only believe, and she will be well." And when he came to the house, he allowed no one to enter with him except for Peter and John and James, and the father and mother of the child. And all were weeping and mourning for her. But he said, "Do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But taking her by the hand, he called, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned. And she got up at once. And he directed that something should be given to her to eat. And her parents were amazed. And he charged them to tell no one as to what had happened. Well, this event starts right off where we last left. Jesus leaves the land of the Gerasenes and sails back to what Mark calls the other side, and Luke just says he returned. If you recall, we hadn't been able really to peg Jesus to a specific place, other than that he was kind of traveling around and he decides to cross the sea. Now, despite not being specifically mentioned, Jairus is the ruler of the synagogue at Capernaum. They would have launched from Capernaum as well, and it was probably one of the disciples' boats. Now, I'm going to note that we're in Capernaum, and I'm going to go back and note that we launched from there as well, back in verse 22. Remember, you're never restricted to where you are. If you discover something new, go back and adjust what you thought you knew before whenever you found out the new information. His return was warm, and they were waiting for him. They were excited to see him back. His popularity is rising at an incredible rate at this point, and he can't seem to go anywhere without a crowd from this point out. We'll see in a moment just how dense this crowd really is. Now, Jesus was well known in Capernaum now, as, well, this was his home. I don't know how much Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed in him before this moment of desperate need, but that moment was here now. And he comes to Jesus before he could even get off the shore of the sea, and he falls at the feet of Jesus. His daughter, after all, was dying. There was nothing more he could do. Matthew even writes that Jairus reports that the daughter is already dead. It's likely this is maybe another quirk of Matthew's writing, combining some of the events together, avoiding some of the details. Although it could be that Jairus is saying that she's so close to death that she's dead. It doesn't really change the narrative enough to matter in the grand scheme. What matters is that in his moment of desperation to save his little girl's life, he comes to Jesus with a faith that if Jesus comes to his home, that she will live. You know, sometimes it really takes a desperate moment to convince us to come to Christ. I'm going to mark that here. So, being over the synagogue, this would have been also a very serious gesture of humility. The Jewish leaders, his bosses, were already pretty upset at Jesus' teachings. For one of their own to break ranks could destroy him. But what mattered to him was his little girl, his daughter. Being a father of a little girl myself, she's just about to turn 11, just a year younger than Jairus' daughter, I understand where he's coming from. I'd give up anything if it meant saving her. Well, Jesus agrees, and, well, they start trying to move toward the house to where the girl is. And they're having a real tough time. They're having real trouble because the crowd, as Mark puts it, is just thronging about him. They're all pressing in on all sides. They're touching him and pushing all around. Now, keep in mind, Jesus is on a mission with Jairus to get to this little girl, when suddenly the narrative takes a left turn, and the focus comes away from Jairus' daughter, and now we have an all-new story. A woman had heard about Jesus. She had heard of his power and ability to heal. Now, I don't know if she was a local, but she could have been living in isolation, being unclean with this discharge of blood, or hemorrhage, as some versions put it. She's the hemorrhagic woman. This hemorrhage had not healed for 12 years. Imagine bleeding for 12 whole years. Going to doctors, spending every penny she had, and nothing could be done. What was this discharge of blood? Well, it doesn't really tell us in the text. She may have had hemophilia. Some speculate it was a problem with childbirth that had never healed. It could have been something else altogether that we haven't thought of yet. But we do know that she was suffering terribly. This was very likely, well, she was lucky to have survived that long. She had convinced herself that Jesus could heal her. She knew of his power, and she reasoned that if only she could touch the hem of his garment, that would be enough. And now was her opportunity. Everyone was touching him. There was such a crowd. She could push her way through and find some way to come in contact with him, even if it was just the hem of his garment. In the same way that Jairus had no more hope in anything of this world, and he turned to Jesus as his only option, given the faith they had based on what they'd seen or they heard, they turned to Jesus. You know, I made a mark up here about how it was Jairus' moment of desperation. I'm gonna point it down here to the woman as well. Two approaches to Jesus in the hour of need, coming to only him. All right, well, she succeeds. She manages to touch just Jesus' garment. And immediately, the hemorrhage dried up. She was no longer bleeding. She had been healed. How wonderful! Now, back to Jesus. Remember, he's trying to make a beeline to Jairus' house, and suddenly stops dead in his tracks. He starts turning around, looking and asking, as Mark specifies, "Who touched my garments?" Remember, Peter, he's the impulsive one, is probably thinking this is probably the dumbest thing he's ever heard the master say. And I wish I could have been there to see his face saying the same thing in the expression. In my mind, I even hear Peter kind of mocking Jesus' voice as he copies Jesus' words. "Who touched me?" Everyone is touching you, Jesus. Do you not see this crowd? That's why we're not already to Jairus' house. Literally everybody here is touching you in some way. Jesus clarifies in Luke, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." Jesus knows that everyone is touching him. But one of those people was in such desperate need, and they had such faith. He knew that he had healed her. He was trying to get her to reveal herself. It's likely that the crowd started kind of backing up a little. Oops, we touched Jesus, and now he's mad. Okay, what's going on? They're giving Jesus some room at this point. Everyone is denying touching him. And even the woman was trying to blend in with the crowd, as she had been doing. How she knew? Well, whether it was Jesus' gaze or just her heart telling her not to hide anymore, she knew that she was exposed. And she came out before him with fear and trembling and confessed what she had done. She told him that she had been healed. I imagine a pretty tense moment where everyone was watching and waiting to see what happens next. Her heart? Very grateful, but terrified. Would Jesus be angry with her? She was an unclean woman, after all. What would he do? I wish I could have seen the smile on Jesus' face as he calls her daughter, and then tells her that her faith has made her well, and to go in peace and be healed of her disease. You know, remember the Sermon on the Mount? Jesus said in Matthew 7:7, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be open to you." That's what Jairus and this woman are doing. No, they aren't asking for wealth or fame or anything worldly in nature. They're asking for the things that they can't do on their own. The things that they need God to accomplish. I'm going to notate that verse right here. Well, while Jesus is saying these final things to her, someone comes from Jairus' house with grim news. The girl is now dead. The messenger, to the side, tells him, "Don't trouble Jesus any further. After all, what else can be done once death has occurred?" Oh, how heavy Jairus' heart would have been. Would he have hated this unclean woman who stopped them? We don't know. But Jesus overhears the conversation. He tells Jairus not to fear, but to believe. The faith of Jairus in this trying moment is burning so brightly. This page, it's almost hot to the touch. They continue to the house. But the crowd and most of the apostles are left behind, marveling at what they had just seen with the hemorrhagic woman. Peter, James, and John go with Jesus to Jairus' home. Now, why Peter, James, and John? To be honest, I'm not sure. The Bible doesn't really tell us. So this is one spot I'd rather not speculate on. Some call them the inner circle of Christ, but that's really more of a construct that's been put upon them based on a few circumstances. Jesus loves his disciples, and there is really no distinction made between them, save for here at the Mount of Transfiguration and in the Garden of Gethsemane when they were with Jesus, these three. That's really all there is to go off of, making them any kind of distinction from any of the others. We can have an argument about Peter another time. Well, when they got to the house, there was great weeping and wailing. Naturally, for a child to die would cause great sorrow. I would imagine that her mother, especially after having just passed, was howling in her grief, as well as any other family members. But in the tradition of the day, when someone is near death, there would be these professional mourners. The closest thing that I can think of would be like funeral attendants today. They're paid to be there and to be an aid to the mourning family. These people would have been making a loud mourning cry to aid in the weeping. Remember, this is a very different culture than ours is today. I'm going to note that they're not all family members here. That'll explain something else here in just a few moments. All right, so this crowd is there. And Jesus comes up with Jairus, who's likely beside himself, distraught. But he's doing his best to have faith in Jesus. And quite frankly, based on the text, he's doing a pretty good job. Jesus says, the detail in Mark, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." Now, have you ever heard anyone say something so absurd that you couldn't help but laugh? This comment was, quite frankly, so vile and insensitive to the situation that these people couldn't help but laugh at Jesus. Well, from their point of view, anyway. It's interesting that this is the language that Jesus uses anytime he discusses the dead. The apostles actually mirror him in their writings. You know, this is far too important to ignore. Jesus talks about Lazarus being asleep in John 11:11. Matthew mentions it, looking back upon the resurrection, saying that the bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised in chapter 27, verse 52. Luke says it in describing the end of Stephen being stoned to death in Acts chapter 7 and verse 60, saying he fell asleep. And about King David in Acts chapter 13 and verse 36, when he says that King David fell asleep and was laid with his fathers and saw corruption, meaning that the body decayed. This word for sleeping is used interchangeably in Paul's writings in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 verse 39, chapter 11 verse 30, chapter 15 verse 6, later on in the same chapter, verse 18, verse 20, verse 51, and in the First Thessalonian letter in chapters 4 verses 13 through 15, chapter 5 verse 10. Even Peter uses the same term in 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 4. To sleep and to die are used in the same context and can be interchangeable. This is not by coincidence or accident. It speaks to our eternal existence. When we die to this life, there is something more, and that barrier for Christ is, well, I'm going to notate that, and we'll continue the story. Well, Jesus tells them all to get out, except for the girl's parents and, well, the disciples who were with him. And they do. He takes the lifeless hand of the girl in his, and he says to her, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." In all of history, at this point, there have only ever been 3 people who have been raised from the dead. Elijah raises the widow's son in 1 Kings chapter 17. Elisha raises the Shunammite woman's son in 2 Kings chapter 4. And then there's a dead man who's revived when his body touches Elisha's bones in 2 Kings chapter 13. That's it. It's not happened before those instances, nor has it happened since those instances. Death, we all understand even today, is final, it is definite, and it is a constant and great equalizer amongst all men. Man has absolutely no power over death. Only one power in the universe can resurrect the dead, and that's the power of God Himself. This young girl, who had taken her very last breath in this life, at a precious 12 years young. Her heart had stopped. Her mind no longer possessed any spark of life. And suddenly she draws another breath. Think about that for a moment. For her parents, when she gets up and she starts moving about the room, I can't imagine. She moved very far, to be honest, as her parents likely scooped her up in their arms in jubilation. And with tears streaming down their faces, they're examining her, they're hugging and kissing her in complete disbelief of a true miracle they had just seen taking place before their very eyes. With the simple touch of his hand and the precious words from his precious lips. This was the power of the one true God. How long this moment lasts? Well, it's not really recorded. But Jesus tells the parents, go get the girl something to eat. I love that. Imagine going on a journey to the land of the dead and back. And how hungry a child would be after such a journey. Or, I'm reminded of a TikTok that I once watched of a character named Tubby Nugget. It's a cute little character who says heartwarming and silly things. Tubby said, "I love you, therefore I feed you." I've used that phrase many times, and I think this is more along those lines, really. Children should be fed. It makes them happy. It could be that she died of something having to do with her stomach, but I'm going to go with the endearment factor because I don't think it matters much for our salvation. It fits how Jesus loves the little children so, and, well, I like it better. A little comfort food would have cheered up everyone. Give the girl some dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets and a blue box and some blue box mac and cheese, please. Anyone? What do you think in the comments section? Why does Jesus insist on feeding her? I would love to hear your thoughts. All right, well, Jesus has done this incredible miracle with just a few witnesses. Let's face it, it's not his time yet, though. So he charges everyone there to tell no one of the single greatest miracle of all mankind that has just happened. So, naturally, as Matthew tells us in Matthew chapter 9, verse 26, this report went throughout all that district. If you've ever lived in a small town where everyone knows everybody, you understand. I'll quote Albus Dumbledore from the Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone as he speaks to Harry at the end of the book. He says, "What happened down in the dungeons is between you and Professor Quirrell. It's all a complete secret. So naturally, the whole school knows." When something so wonderful and amazing happens, one can't help but tell. And something like this would spread like wildfire. We'll see Jesus' popularity continuing to increase for quite a while longer. Thanks for watching and for studying with me. Next time, Jesus will send the apostles out on a test run. If they thought watching Jesus do miracles was incredible, just wait until they can do the miracles. If you enjoyed this study, hit that like button. Share with someone who would also enjoy it. Don't forget to comment and subscribe for more. And if you'd like to help me make further videos or want to thank me for this one, you can leave a donation via the PayPal, Venmo, or Cash App links below. Maybe you'd like to dive further into Scripture. Well, check out some of my other videos on the screen and come back next time as we continue here in Luke on Christianity Minute.